It was a cold and misty morning on Baker Street when a sudden knock broke the stillness of our rooms. The sun had barely risen, and London lay wrapped in fog. Mrs. Hudson announced an early visitor, and a moment later a young woman stepped into our sitting room. Her face was pale, her hands trembled, and fear seemed to follow her like a shadow. She introduced herself as Helen Stoner. Her voice shook as she explained that she lived with her stepfather, Dr. Grimesby Roylott, in an old ancestral home called Stoke Moran. 2 years ago, her twin sister Julia had died mysteriously just before her wedding. The last words Julia ever spoke were strange and haunting. It was the speckled band. Since then, Helen had lived in constant dread. As she spoke, Holmes listened silently, his keen gray eyes fixed upon her face. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and murmured that it was indeed a most curious case. He asked her to describe her home, her room, and the circumstances of her sister's death. Every detail mattered, every pause carried weight. She told us of the great, crumbling house, half in ruin, half inhabited. Dr. Roylott, once a doctor in India, now lived in seclusion, growing violent and unpredictable. Exotic animals roamed his estate, a cheetah, a baboon, and who knew what else. Her sister had died in a locked room, alone, with no marks upon her body. There had been no sign of struggle, only that terrible cry and those final words. Holmes asked about the room itself. She explained that her sister's bed was fixed to the floor, the windows barred, and a ventilator connected not to the outside, but to the next room, her stepfather's chamber. A bell rope hung beside the bed, though it led nowhere. As she spoke, I could see Holmes's expression change from curiosity to quiet intensity. When Helen finished, Holmes rose and said we would visit Stoke Moran at once. He warned her not to mention our visit to her stepfather and to stay somewhere safe for the night. She thanked us, her eyes bright with fragile hope, and departed. The following morning, we took the train into the countryside. The air grew colder as we neared Stoke Moran, and the old house stood in lonely silence among bare trees. Dr. Roylott confronted us briefly, a tall, harsh-faced man with cruel eyes and immense strength. He tried to intimidate Holmes, even bending an iron poker in his hands. But Holmes only smiled and straightened it again when the man had gone. We examined the rooms carefully. The ventilator, the bell rope, the bed fixed to the floor, all exactly as Helen had described. Holmes tapped each wall, examined each joint, and nodded slowly. "There is danger here," he said quietly, "a danger more cunning than any I have seen." He told Helen that we would return that night, and she must move into another room for her own safety. After nightfall, we slipped back into the house under cover of darkness. The air was heavy with silence, and the faint sound of distant animals echoed through the halls. We entered Julia's old room with a lamp shaded low. Holmes pointed to the bed, the rope, and the ventilator. He whispered for me to remain still and to watch. The hours passed slowly. The darkness pressed around us, broken only by the ticking of a clock and the soft creak of old wood. Then at last it came, a faint, low hiss from above the bed. Holmes sprang up instantly, striking at the bell rope with his cane. There was a sudden metallic clang, a flash of motion, and then silence. When Holmes lit the lamp, I saw it, coiled upon the floor, writhing in fury. A small snake, marked with yellow speckles. Its eyes burned in the dim light, its fangs gleaming like needles. "The speckled band," Holmes said grimly. "The deadliest snake in India, the swamp adder." Dr. Roylott used it to murder his stepdaughter, sending it through the ventilator to crawl down the rope and strike as she slept. As the creature hissed in rage, Holmes drove it back through the opening. A few seconds later, a terrible cry echoed from the next room, a scream of pain and terror, then silence. We rushed in to find Dr. Roylott lifeless in his chair, the snake coiled around his neck, its poison having turned upon its master. Holmes stood still for a moment, gazing at the scene with quiet solemnity. "Violence," he said softly, "has a way of returning to those who deal in it." He turned to me and added, "It is poetic justice, Watson. Grim, but just." When morning came, the storm had passed. Helen was safe, the mystery was ended, and the house of Stoke Moran stood silent once more. As we left, the first light of dawn touched the old stones, and I saw Holmes looking out across the fields with thoughtful eyes. "There is no darkness," he said gently, "that reason cannot pierce. Even the most dreadful secrets yield to patience and truth." And with that, we turned back toward London, leaving behind the shadows and the echo of that terrible cry, the last of the speckled band.